Good day, everyone. Sir Darwin, I am Madeline Jane Ortiz, one of the members of this group that will be discussing changes happened in DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR. But first, what does this book's all about? For the introductory background of our report today, DSM-5 and DSM-5-TR are medical reference books intended for experts and professionals. The content in this book is very technical, though people who aren't medical professionals may still find it interesting or educational. So for more facts about DSM, Alisa Bernardino will continue the next slide.
So I will discuss defining DSM, DSM-5, and DSM-5-TR. So I will start in DSM. Ang meaning ng DSM is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder. Ang DSM contains descriptions, symptoms, and other criteria for diagnosis mental disorder. DSM is intended to serve as practical, functional, and flexible guide for organizing information that can aid in the accurate diagnosis and treatment of mental disorder. So, meron po tayong iba-ibang edition ng DSM. Ang first ever edition po ng DSM, na-publish po siya noong 1952. And sumunod naman po yung second edition ng DSM noong 1968. And nagkaroon din po sila ng publish ng third edition ng DSM noong 1960. The APA published a revised version, the DSM-3R, noong 1987. 1994, nagkaroon naman po sila ng 4th edition of DSM. The APA published a text revision version, the DSM-4-TR, noong 2000. 2013, nagkaroon naman po sila ng 5th edition ng DSM. The APA published a text revision version, the DSM-5-TR, noong 2022. One is yung DSM-5. DSM-5 covers a range of diagnoses, including depressive disorder, eating and feeding disorder, personality disorder, and trauma and stressors-related disorder. Since 1952, updates have been made to the DSM, leading up to its most recent publication in 2013 as the 5th edition. DSM-5-TR is a text revision of DSM-5 and included po dito yung mga revised text and new reference, clarifications to diagnostic criteria, and updates to ICD-10 CM codes since DSM-5 was published in 2013. It features a new disorder, prolonged grief disorder, as well as ICD-10 CM codes for suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury.
Thank you, Ms. Bernardino. So let's move on to changes in DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR. So based on our research and studying about the revision of the DSM-5, we found the 6 major changes happened from the DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR. So for our next slide, here's the first major changes from the DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR. It says revised text for almost all disorders with updated sections on associated features, prevalence, development, and course, risk and prognostic factors, culture, diagnostic markers, suicide, and differential diagnosis. And in addition to that, according to the APA, that also changed to DSM-5-TR, that over 70 modified criteria sets with helpful clarifications since publication of DSM-5. So here, Here are some diagnostic criteria that has been revised for several disorders in DSM-5-TR. So primarily for classifications, we have here the autism spectrum disorder, manic episode, bipolar and bipolar disorder. We have here that I think I've read it uh to DSM-5-TR while we are researching. We have bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. And we have here cyclothymic disorder, major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, PTSD in children, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, delirium, substance medication induced mental disorders, attenuated psychosis syndrome in the chapter condition for the further study. So that is all for the revise for several disorders that happened in our DSM-5-TO. Yeah. So for our next second major changes, addition of the new diagnosis of prolonged grief disorder to section 2. So there is other new diagnosis added to section 2, but this prolonged grief disorder was one of our selected disorder discussed in our report. So it says that prolonged grief disorder is defined as intense yearning or longing for the deceased, often with intense sorrows and emotional pain. So these are the people who had this disorder has an inability to move past grief over the loss of loved ones, and that symptoms affect day-to-day functionality. So in addition to that, these new diagnoses are both used for children and adults. As stated to APA website, it was added to the criteria to define the difference between children and adolescents versus adults. The intent of that is to reflect current scientific evidence and highlight the different reactions children or adolescents might have in such situations. Yeah. So proceed to next. We have here, the third major change from DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR. So fully updated introduction and use of the manual to guide usage and provide context for important terminology. So this part of revision can highly help the readers to understand the DSM-5 and how it might need to revise and to add new diagnoses.
The major changes from DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR. Number 4. Considerations of the impact of racism and discrimination on mental disorders integrated into the text. Racialized identities are important because they are strongly associated with system of discrimination, marginalization, and social exclusion. Other aspects of identity including ethnicity, gender, language, religion, and social orientation may also be the focus of bias or stereotyping that can affect the process of diagnostic assessment. The Cross-Cutting Review Committee on Cultural Issues and Ethno-Racial Equity and Inclusion Work Group collaborated on the following changes. A. The term racialized is used instead of racial to underscore that race is a social construct. B. Ethno-racial is used to define and combine the U.S. Census categories that encompass both ethnicity and race, such as white, African American, and Hispanic. C. Minority and non-white. are no longer used, as they are thought to describe racial groups in relation to white people, creating a social hierarchy. Letter D. Latinx is used instead of Latino or Latina in an effort to promote gender equality. E. Caucasian is no longer used because of its obsolete description of the origins of the Pan-European ethnicity. F. Data about the prevalence of certain disorders in specific ethno-racial groups was added when existing research included reliable data. Racism generates trauma, making it a problem for mental health. Additionally, trauma has a clear connection to mental diseases, which must be treated severely. Racism is a wide term used to describe the interaction of power and bias based on a race. Racism is only prejudice without the power imbalance, which has less significance and less impact. Based on Mental Health America, there are different types of racism. Systematic or structural racism. It has three components: history, culture, and institutions. Historical racism provides the framework for current racism. Any structure built on a foundation of racism will be a racist structure. Culture, which is ever present in our day to live, is what allows racism to be accepted, normalized, and perpetuated. Institutions and policies makes up the fundamental relationships and rules across society which reinforces racism and give it societal legitimacy. Interpersonal racism. Racism that happens between individual people when individual beliefs or prejudices becomes actions towards others. Institutional racism. Institutional racism occurs within and between institutions. Institutional racism is a discriminatory treatment, unfair policies, and inequitable opportunities and impacts based on a race, produced and perpetuated by institutions. Individuals within institutions take on the power of the institution when they act in ways that advantage and disadvantage people based on race. Internalized racism. When racism and white supremacy affect the minds of black, indigenous, and people of color, to the point where they begin to believe that they are inferior because of their own race. This can sometimes lead to interracial hostility, in which BIPOC treat other BIPOC in a way that mirrors how white racists might treat them. Another way internalized racism can manifest is by BIPOC accepting and internalizing Eurocentric ideals and values. Reverse racism. This term is in quotes to emphasize that it's a made-up term that shouldn't carry any actual value. It was a term created by and for white people who want to perpetuate racism by denying their privilege in all its forms and by claiming that fighting to improve that the lives of BIPOC is somehow racist against white people. MHA considers this term invalid because racism in any form depends on a presence of a power differential. White people have historically always fallen on the powerful side rather than the powerless side. Reverse racism is therefore impossible as long as we live in a society that perpetuates white supremacy. Oppression, the use of power to dominate over other or the refusal of a system, institution, group, individual who possesses this power to challenge that domination. Racial trauma. This is the last one. Simply traumatization that results from experiencing racism is any of its many forms. Importantly, this doesn't have to be one major isolated event, but rather it can be resolved from accumulation of experiences like daily subtle acts of discrimination or microaggressions.
Thank you, Ms. Shane Almendras. So, before we proceed to the fifth and sixth major changes of DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR, let us discuss first what is ICD-10-CM codes. So, it's stated here in our PowerPoint presentation. ICD-10-CM means International Classifications of Diseases, 10th revision, clinical modification. Is a version of the World Health Organization's ICD-10 that has been modified for clinical use by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's National Center for Health Statistics. It provides the only permissible diagnostic codes for mental disorders for clinical use in the United States. So I'm giving some facts that in DSM-5 before, ICD-9 and ICD-10-CM are both provided, but in DSM-5-TR, ICD-10-CM codes are only provided. And where we can find this ICD-10 ICD-10-CM codes rather. So we can find and see it in DSM-5-TR classification before the disorder name. So I have here the example, and as you can see here in the slides, this is the anatomy of an ICD-10-CM code. The first letters and numbers is subcategory. Next is the substance, placeholder, intention, and extension. And I have here more examples. Yan. That is how ICD-10-CM looks like. Right? You can see it in you can see it in DSM-5-TR classification section of the book. In the fifth major change from DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR, it says here, new ICD-10-CM codes to flag and monitor suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury that can be used without the requirement of another diagnosis. So, these are the new symptoms codes, which allows clinicians to indicate the presence or history of suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury. So suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury codes appear in section 2 chapter, which is the other condition that can or that may be focused of clinical attention. Next slide. Yeah. In the sixth and last major change from DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR, it says here, updated ICD-10-CM codes implemented since 2013, including over 50 coding updates new to DSM-5-TR for substance intoxication and withdrawal and other disorders. So the picture below shows a simple visual understanding about revision. So from a simple drawing or basic understanding of diagnosis codes, then it refined it, the arrow represent the revision and refine it to a broaden and enhance the scope, like the picture in the right side. The picture was enhanced. It make some it made some colors there, like what the DSM-5. Some description as maybe some description are need to revise because it is so complex to understand. And then they revise it to DSM-5-TR and make it simpler. And some diagnosis name was renamed because of the impact of culture and the impact of the uh, the social issues, the mental health of people. Then yeah, that's all. So that's why in DSM-5-TR there has a wider range of understanding a diagnosis codes than DSM-5. Yeah. Next.
Other additions with is unspecified mood disorders. The unspecified mood disorders, this diagnosis is used when the symptoms are predominantly in the line with the depressive disorders diagnosis, but they do not meet the full diagnostic criteria of any of the depressive or adjustment disorders. This is the diagnosis na nalulungkot ka, ngunit hindi tugma ang pinapakita mo or sinasabi mo na may mga karamdaman nito na to contribute to depressive mood. Sa more precise criteria in DSM-5-TR, autism spectrum disorder criterion appraised as manifested by the following was revised to read as manifested by all of the following. To improve its clarity, the revisions by the work group was made to maintain a high diagnostic threshold by requiring all the following and not any of the following criteria, as could be mistakenly implied by the previous wording of the citations. Change furthermore improve the sequence to better clarity and higher level to these standards into diagnosis. In the autism spectrum, they have disability caused by difference in the brain. May problema sila sa pakikipag-interactions and sa pakikipag-communications. Other change from DSM-5 to DS-5-TR is two disorders have been renamed. This is intellectual disability, now is intellectual development disorders. And the other one is conversions disorders and now functional disorder. Significant update to the terminology of gender dysphoria. This is desired gender and experienced genders. The other one is cross-sex medical procedures and gender-affirming procedures. And the third is the term natal male and female and individual assigned male-female birth.
Other changes from DSM-5 to DSM-5-TR. So, may mga changes po tayo sa DSM-5-TR Section 3. Una, yung clinical sequence or changes regarding the assessment measure. Yung sex, male or female checkboxes. In DSM-5-TR, all 6 male or female checkbox at beginning of each measure were deleted to eliminate the use of binary classification. So, dinilit po nila or inalis po nila yung mga checkbox na para po sa mga male or female. Para po wala pong binary classification. Clinician-rated dimension of psychosis, symptom severity measure. The instructions for use of the measure were edited in keeping with criteria. Severity specifiers for schizophrenia, spectrum, and other psychotic disorder. So, dito po sa clinician-rated dimension, ang instructions na nagawa po nila ay na-edit na po. World Health Organization Disability Assessment Schedule 2.0. Clarifications were added to the instructions on how to calculate the summary scores for the WHO 2.0 36-item full version. So, dito po sa World Health Organization naman is gaano kadalas nila nakakalculate yung kada episode po. Yung number 2 is cultural context. The cultural context section provides a comprehensive review of the cultural context of a mental disorder. And the cultural formulation interview, or CFI, for clinical use, it includes basic information on integrating culture and social context in clinical diagnosis, as well as cultural formulation and cultural concepts of distress. Minimake sure po nila na walang stigmatizing, na wala ding generalization, na wala na pong gagamit na words for discrimination. So, dito sa alternative DSM-5 model for personality disorder, provides an alternative to the exact personality disorder classification in Section 2. This section was not changed from DSM-5. So, ibig sabihin po nito, wala pong nabago at same lang po siya ng DSM-5. For condition for further study, the chapter includes proposed criteria sets presented for condition on which research is encouraged. It is hoped that such research will allow the field to better understand this condition and inform future decisions about possible placement in the DSM.
Summarization. DSM offers criteria for the diagnosis of mental disorders along with symptoms, explanations, and other criteria. It established consistent and trustworthy diagnoses that are utilized in research on mental disorders and gives clinicians a common vocabulary to discuss with their patients. The main goal of DSM-5-TR is to comprehensively update and the descriptive text that is provided to each DSM disorder based on the reviews of the literature since the release of the prior version of DSM-5-TR is a text revision of DSM-5 and it includes revised text and new references, clarifications to diagnostic criteria, and updates to ICD-10-CM codes since DSM-5 was published in 2013. It features a new disorder, prolonged grief disorder, as well as ICD-10-CM codes for suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury.
So that's all for our report today. Hope you have learned from us about the changes in DSM-5 to DSM-5 still. Thank you and God bless.